Good morning, everybody. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Mark McAffee, who will be speaking on raw milk, the gut biome builder like no other food on earth. Mark is the founder CEO of Organic Pastures Dairy Company, the third-ranked brand of organic dairy products in the USA, serving 600 stores in California and more than 3,500 stores nationally and in Canada, with certified organic pasture-grazed raw dairy and cheese products, founder and chairman of Raw Milk Institute, director of the California Dairy Campaign, director at California Farmers Union, and delegate to National Farmers Union, the director of the Price Pottinger Nutritional Foundation, founding board member of the Rodell Institute-sponsored Organic Farmers Association Policy Committee, lecturer on the medical benefits of gut biome and genomic effects of raw unprocessed dairy products, founder of Farmers Over Pharmacies podcast and YouTube series. So if we can give him a welcome.
Thank you. Well, today we're going to take a whirlwind tour from things beyond our comprehension to things that are certainly personal. So, I'm totally honored to be speaking here today and talking about raw milk because a galaxy that we live in was actually named after milk. And if you consider that, it's pretty humbling to consider the fact that we live right here. That's planet Earth in this massive galaxy which we can barely wrap our brains around that we live in. If you ever look up, it's hard to look up in the city and see it, but out in the country we see this incredible Milky Way above us. And it's pretty profound to think that we're microscopic within that, but yet here we are today thinking we're so big. So we're going to take a whirlwind tour around the concept of raw milk today, but in a very circuitous way to make it interesting, because I've spoke so much about raw milk around the world that I kind of bore myself with talking about the same thing. So we're going to talk about this a little differently, maybe bringing even a little bit of humor into it, so we can get a perception on what we're talking about when we talk about raw milk. With that said, this is where we are today, right here in the Milky Way. Now, we are living in the Goldilocks zone. That's what the scientists call it. Not too hot, not too cold, just right for life. What a profound place to live. And the first form of life on Earth was the archaea bacteria. And interestingly enough, they're mutual and commensal in our gut. And guess what? They create methane gas. So the next time you break wind, think first form of life on Earth, I'm still alive, we're good to go. It's profound to think that the human gut still has these things. Cows have them too. Methane gas is created by these digesters of food, and they help us digest. They're part of our commensal biome in our gut. But they were the first life forms on Earth. And literally, Earth is our embryo. It's our larger biome. It's the living space that we have. And mankind has looked really long and hard to find another place to live. We've researched and taken moonshots and done all kinds of things to look out and see where we could find some other place to live if there was a possibility. And we have not been very successful. We've gone to the moon. There's no gravity. It's very cold. There's no oxygen. There's no bacteria there. There's no water, and there's no life. But yet we look at the moon thinking, wow, there's the moon. But yet there's no life there. So Mother Earth is a very special place. In fact, it's interesting that in 1970, I was 9 years old. My birthday was April 12th. And on April 11th, Apollo 13 was shot out in space, and 3 souls went out to the longest reach that man has ever gone away from Earth, to the record today, 248,000 miles from Earth to the backside of the moon. And they had a calamity on the second day. Anybody familiar with that story, Apollo 13? Well, they lost their biome, their artificial biome around them, and they had to go from their command module into their lunar module to save their lives because there was no more oxygen because their oxygen tanks blew up, and they had to go to the lunar module as kind of an escape raft to survive, to figure out how the heck they're going to get back to Earth because they lost their life support system. They were certainly out of the biome at that point. What they had was missing, and they were scared to death, and they were petrified. And Houston was trying to figure out how to fix their biome to get them back to Earth. And meanwhile, they were just languishing up there, freezing, looking back at Earth, longing for life. And here they are on the 17th of April, and they had returned back to life. And these guys, Jack Swigert and James Lavelle and Fred Hayes, were so happy to be splashing down in the warm waters of the Pacific Ocean thinking, we survived. This is powerful to be rejoined with our families. But they escaped back to Earth safely, and our heroes. And there we are. Houston, we have a problem, Jim Lovell. Frank said that. So, Tom Hanks said that. So, to get a bit bigger perspective on where we are and what we are and how we evolved to be where we are today, we are evolved of the Earth biome. We are not separate from it. We are part of it, literally. The bacteria which started life on Earth still reside in our gut today. We're not separate from Earth. We are part of the Earth biome, from literally the roots in our plants and the soils to our guts. And the more we get away from that, the sicker we become. So here are some villi right here showing the villi structure of our intestines, and there's the bigger shot of the intestine. But it's interesting that I co-presented at a National Farmers Union convention 2 years ago in San Diego, and one of the presenters that co-presented with me was Dr. Jenny Casera, and she is a USDA soil scientist. And she talked about all of the life below Earth and all the roots and all the things, the effect of Roundup and the bacteria and the soil and the roots. And I talked about the gut biome, and at the end of the presentation, we came to complete agreement that they're the same, that they're similar. They're literally similar life forms, that what we do in the soil and what we do in our gut are matched up. And this is powerful to have the USDA standing on a stage with the raw milk guy talking about the gut biome and the relevance of soils and the earth in our gut and how connected we are with these fantastic bacteria that transcend what we think this great distance, what is actually not. We're part of it. Very profound. Raw milk is a gut biome building food like none other on earth. And if anybody was here to hear Aaron talk earlier today, fantastic presentation. It was profoundly confirming to me because I love breastfeeding and the whole idea about breastfeeding and starting initiating the biome in the child's, the baby's gut. When it did not exist before, raw milk's the first food of life. Breast milk's the first food of life and has been for a long, long, long time. So that's an important thing to shift our minds to think that raw milk is the first food of life for mammalian life on Earth, and it starts the beginning of the biome generation for the gut. It contains the seeds of life, 700 different kinds of bacteria. It's teeming with different kinds of bacteria at low levels. Has 2,500 different kinds of proteins, all kinds of enzymes, and untold other kinds of heat-sensitive elements and proteins, essential for the baby and essential for life. Very, very profound. The seeds of life are literally in raw milk. Dr. Bonnie Basler made a speech on TED Talk, which deeply affected me about 10 years ago. Anybody seen her TED Talk? If you want to spend 12 minutes to change your life, this is a very powerful thing to look at, the TED Talk by Dr. Bonnie Basler. She was one of the researchers back in the Human Genome Project. Back in the 1990s, the Department of Defense asked a question, late in the 80s, early 90s. The Department of Defense, the DOE, the Department of Energy, wanted to know what the human genome was because they didn't know. They didn't know what the effect of radiation would be on the human body. So they wanted to know what makes us genetically human. What is it that makes us human? Because they wanted to be able to study any changes that might happen by the influence of radiation on the human body. So $4 billion of taxpayers' money was spent, some NIH matching funds, but the Department of Energy actually did this research project. And boy, oh me, in 2002, 2003, when they announced the results of this project to Congress, everybody really was shocked. They said, we found the human genome, but it's not what you think it is. We're genomically human because we got 23,000 pairs of genes from our mom and dad. But there are millions of genetic pieces that play with that to complete it. And they do not come from the human inheritance. They come from the genome. They come from the bacteria which co-inhabitate our body, as well as the genomics, the DNA that those bacteria share with human cells. And that the human cells and bacterial cells actually cross-communicate at the cellular level, very sophisticated with the language of chemistry. And so when the human cell stands by itself, it's actually very stupid. It doesn't know what to do, unless it has the influence of all this incredibly powerful genomic information that's in its biome around it that actually shares and communicates and directs it what to do. In fact, when we get too clean and we get rid of the bacterial DNA, what happens? we become an autoimmune mess. So we really have to reconsider what we are to understand where we are today, how to feed ourselves, to make these NTA experts back here be able to be excellent in feeding our biome so that we become a thriving species instead of one in decline. And so this is a powerful thing to consider, the fact that when you count all the cells in the body, there are 1 to 10 ratio of bacterial cells to human cells. In other words, for one human cell, there's 10 bacterial cells, mostly in the gut, but also around other parts of the body. There are very few bacterial cells found in our lungs and in our brains. But in the rest of our body, they're spread all over the place. But the DNA contribution is literally 100 to 1 or 98 to 1 in terms of the DNA information cell to cell. That is really, really profound. And this came from the Department of Energy doing a $4 billion study to figure out what we are genomically, only to find out that we are literally bacteriosapiens. That's my favorite little thing to say. Because we are. We really, really are. And when you understand that macro concept, everything changes. You take that antibiotic a little more reluctantly. You're a little more cautious about eating foods with high preservatives and Roundup. You start really thinking about the biome within and the bacteriosapien that needs to thrive. Unless you want to commit suicide, go for it. But the bottom line is we don't want to go down that path if we want to thrive on Earth. So this is very, very powerful here. And Dr. Bonnie Basler, she said, hey, we came from bacteria. Who do you think thought up the rules? Archaea was the beginning, and then it evolved and evolved and evolved. So very powerful kind of first thought of how we are what we are. What are the causes for this gut biome loss and chronic inflammation that we have? It's not the lack of medications or lack of surgery. No, not at all. It is the lack of food for our gut. Lack of food for our gut. And so the worst of the biome killers, if you've seen Jeffrey Smith's work, are literally the antibiotics and then antibiotics and Roundup, which is also an antibiotic. Roundup is now pervasive all through our environments. It's found in breast milk, it's found in rainwater, it's found in our food, it's found all over the place. The best shot at a Roundup-free diet would be one that's organic, because Roundup is forbidden in organic practices, and would be a good shot. And those that have embraced an organic diet do not see Roundup in their food, generally speaking. It should not be there. Antibiotics, let's face it, they can be life-saving. But the more we use them, the more they don't work. So we have to really, really save the use of antibiotics for when we need them. Think about a police officer with a gun in his holster. If you used it all the time, we'd have nothing but inflammation in this country. But if you use it extremely sparingly and only when to save a life, that's the correct use of an antibiotic. But the use of antibiotics is a very severe approach to taking care of things. We've got to be preventing through biome enhancement and making sure our immune system functions, so we don't need to use the antibiotics like we have in the last 50 years so openly and easily and just pervasively and abusively. So here are some of the big ones. Antibiotic overuse, sterilized and processed foods, including preserved foods that have these interesting shelf-life extension elements in there. They're not good for gut life, but they're certainly good for shelf life, the industrial system for food. C-sections, they can be life-saving as well. But we have to realize the backside of them, the mother and baby connection, is kind of incomplete until the baby gets reconnected about all of mom's birth canal fluids, which is so important. And breastfeeding and all that stuff certainly does a great job of making sure that biome connection is there. But C-sections have done us no favors in terms of the ease. C-sections for convenience has not helped us with children getting that transfer initially at birth. Lack of breastfeeding has been a big problem. Preservatives in our food, they kill off biodiversity of bacteria in our gut, which are critical for our immune system to function, as well as the gut bacteria itself. Roundup herbicides, we talked about, and bacteria paranoia. We stand at farmers markets and talk to moms across tables. It's interesting to hear the Russian accent or the German accent or the South American accent, and they come and say, give me that milk like I've got back home. Yum, gross. Oh, thank you, thank you. They go away. You got the mom from America coming, or first world countries coming, I'm not so sure about that. It's a living food. Raw, isn't that supposed to be cooked first? This paranoia, this concept in their mind, which is not held universally around the world. It's an enculturated issue that we have here in America because of the last 80 years of really indoctrinated the fact that we must have pasteurized products. It's the only thing safe. Not appreciating and realizing that since 1972, the CDC does not have any American raw milk killing anybody. There's been 84 deaths from pasteurized milk. and 175,000 illnesses from pasteurized dairy, mostly from listeria that loves to grow in a sterile environment, a semi-sterile environment, that contaminates pasteurized milk after being pasteurized. Raw milk has a propensity of diversity in it. And guess what? Listeria doesn't like that kind of environment. The last 10 people to die have all been associated with listeria. We had some Bluebell ice cream that killed a few people. We had some Craven's cheese and some pasteurized milk. We have not seen deaths from American raw milk. There's been some raw milk cheeses brought in from Mexico that killed a couple people. I have no idea what that's all about, but it's not America, so I'm not going to claim it. But the CDC literally does not have any deaths. There's been some illnesses, yes. And that's because raw milk intended for pasteurization and raw milk intended for human consumption are two different products. And when people hear how great raw milk is, they run down to the local dairy, and the local dairy does not specialize in raw milk for human consumption. They dump anything in there because it's going to go off to be pasteurized. And that's where you generally see most of the problems with raw milk for human consumption in America, because people don't get where it's coming from. For the last century or so, last 100 years, we've really been busy as dwellers on the Earth, destroying our macrobiome. We see all kinds of issues with global warming going on. We see contamination. We see all kinds of stuff going on. It ain't pretty. Now it's affecting our inner biome. Remember, we're one with Earth. But now we're seeing that transcending into our inner biome, and we're seeing 130,000 colostomies a year. 1 million cases of Crohn's, irritable bowel, and celiac in the United States considered to be moderate or severe. 1 million. There's only 350 million people here. That's 1 in every 350 people that actually have something really severe going on in the gut. Unmentioned all the other people who have gut pain and walk around with all kinds of problems in their gut. So our gut is on fire. It is on fire. Here's a Crohn's type colitis patient here with ulcerations going in the intestine, and that's what it's supposed to look like. So we really have a gut on fire. 1 million cases, that's just incredible. Asthma, food allergies, obesity, diabetes, chronic inflammation, autoimmune diseases, they're all rampant, and they're all gut-based. So we really have to pay attention to how we conduct business in terms of how we eat, which is the gut biome support. Here's an interesting chart I thought I'd add because it shows the rise of antibiotic resistance. And you see how antibiotics started back in the 1940s here with the beginning of penicillin, and then its resistance in the 1960s and 70s. And there are all these other forms of antibiotics all the way out to 2010, and all of them have come to a point where they don't work anymore. Why? The first form of life on Earth adapted, resisted, and overcame. If it was to die, the pathway forward for life on Earth would die. Bacteria want to live. They must live. If they die, we die. So as we go about killing off parts of bacteria and using these tools to do so, we lose the tools because they resist and overcome. That's how they support life on Earth. And here we see the origins of the common ancestor of archaea here, the beginning of life on Earth, and we see humans out here with animals in the eukarya. So it's interesting to see how the food pyramid of life, it's interesting how the genomics go back to this beginning ancestry. So they bring us strength when we're born, and they eat us after we die. They are life on Earth. Very powerful. The one most shocking thing that I have seen that awakens doctors to appreciate this, because they receive literally no training in medical school, at least up until probably 5 to 10 years ago. I've had an insight that perhaps some of the better schools are starting to teach this stuff, which is really, really cool and really, really important. This is the big disruptor right here. About 15 years ago, 12 years ago, it was 2008, 9, the first fecal transplants were done to save the lives of C. diff patients in the ICU. Here you got this person who's circling the drain, going to die, antibiotic-resistant bacterial infection of Clostridium difficile, and what do you know? They go to the next closest relative who's healthy, and they take a bunch of poop from them, and they put it in a blender, and they flush the lower intestines, and bada boom, bada bang, boom, boom, in 48 hours, they're going new life, and they walk out of the hospital within a few days, and 92% of the time it is effective. We're losing 20,000 people a year to this. This was a massive wake-up call to doctors that, whoa, something's going on here. It wasn't another drug I gave. It wasn't IV. This was a poop transplant. And that's very disruptive to medical school that said, poop's your enemy. And in fact, it's the lifesaver at the end of the road in the ICU. This is powerful stuff, and it's very disruptive. So this, in my opinion, was kind of the turning point of where antibiotics was less the savior and more of the question, and this became a real relevant discussion, and how antibiotics have to be really used as a last ditch, because if you don't, you start to end up with some really bad outcomes. So anyway, pretty profound here. All disease begins in the gut. Hippocrates said this, and I believe he was absolutely right. Dr. Anit Jewett, who is the principal researcher, PhD at UCLA Cancer Center, at Weintraub Cancer Center at UCLA, is NIH funded, believes he was absolutely right as well. In fact, her quote is, "Load and diversity of gut bacteria drives inflammation and differentiates stem cells. In order to have a load, you need to have food to be there, so the bacteria have something to eat. In order to have diversity, you eat unprocessed foods. Things like raw milk kefir with 150 different kinds of bacteria in it. Breast milk, 700 different kinds of bacteria. Maybe a pinch of dirt, I don't know. The bottom line is you can't eat too clean because we're going to depart from our biome connection, which is so critical to life on Earth. So powerful stuff here that our most leading scientists, remember these leading scientists are pioneers. They're 10 or 15 years ahead of common practice, or maybe even 20, 25 years. It takes a while for the truth to catch up with reality in terms of what you actually get in the practice of medicine. So this is powerful stuff. If we want to be living better for the next 20 years as doctors lag, we need to be listening to the NTA people here, and we need to be looking at those that are really feeding the biome to understand the best way forward, because that will be the life preserve we have. Here are some things found in raw milk. Raw milk, here we have a list of raw human milk here, and here's one for cow's milk. And we have pasteurized cow's milk. We have pasteurized almond milk. We have pasteurized soy milk. And you could actually compare all the way across here with hemp milk, macadamia nut milk, and all the dairy alternatives we've got that have gone nuts. Milk has literally gone nuts in the dairy case, which has dominated the dairy case. And I blame pasteurization for that. Because if you pasteurize a product and make it highly allergenic, pasteurized milk is the #1 most allergenic food in America, and hard to digest because it's incomplete and partial, you start having lots of problems with it. And the mind goes, well, I won't drink that anymore. And since you don't have good raw milk there, or at least hasn't in the past, you're going to go to a nut milk that doesn't cause those problems, but it's not complete food. So all the things found in raw milk are very, very profound. You find there's lots of enzymes that are active because it's never been heated. Enzymes are killed by heat. You have a diverse probiotic background flora found in raw milk. You have omega-3 fatty acids if those cows are fed on grass and fed forage versus grain, lots and lots of grain. You have good fatty acid ratios. You have lactase-producing bacteria. A lactase helps you digest lactose. It's a whole food. So anybody can eat raw milk if you give it enough time to adapt and allow these commensal bacteria to actually create lactase for you, because the lactobacillus and coliform bacteria actually create the lactase around the villi. So we are actually going around saying, oh, I've got problems with dairy. You got problems with pasteurized dairy, not raw dairy. Continuing on here, you've got some interesting binding proteins of B12. You've got bioavailable vitamins. You've got the raw fats to help you deal with vitamins. You've got bioavailable calcium. You've got bacteria that create vitamins. You've got phosphorus, phosphatase enzyme. Phosphatase enzyme has been pretty well researched recently. There was a big study done by Dr. Lals in Paris, France, showing that the French paradox and the Mediterranean diet, why was it that that diet is so non-inflammatory? So it decreases inflammation in the body, has just low cardiac disease rates, and it's so good for people in the Mediterranean area. Why is it? They thought, oh, it's the red wine. My wife loves red wine, so it's got to be some red wine in there. But he realized that it takes literally 6,000 gallons of red wine to actually have the effects from the resveratrol, and it really probably wasn't going to do it for you. But it's not going to hurt you. It's good. He looked at the other parts of the Mediterranean diet. 2 pounds, a kilo of raw cheese a week in France. Wow. The alkaline phosphatase enzyme is totally destroyed in pasteurization. In fact, the test for effective pasteurization is called the negative alpha phosphatase test. It's the indicator that, in fact, you've cooked the heck out of the milk. So this enzyme is very alive and well in raw cheeses and in raw milk and raw milk kefirs. So a very powerful anti-inflammatory enzyme, and the study he has is really profound about how this is driving part of the bigger picture of the Mediterranean diet being so anti-inflammatory, part of the French paradox. So it's very interesting to see how these stories unfold. Oligosaccharide sugars, wow! Oligosaccharide sugars are not digestible by the human body. But why is it such an important part of breast milk and raw milk? I think you got it there. Dr. Bruce German at UC Davis, the International Milk Genomics Consortium, studied this, and it's been 10 years ago now, discovered that, in fact, the oligosaccharides, they support the growth of bacteria in the gut. They do not feed the body of the baby. And, in fact, they do selectively. They actually increase the populations of bifidobacteria by feeding them and supporting them and suppressing pathogenic bacteria. Wow. This is that selective, wonderful baby food that comes from mom and comes from raw milk. So really important, these things that are destroyed or changed when you get into the pasteurization side. Lymphocytes, macrophages, neutrophils, lymphocytes, all these things, antibodies, bifidofactors, all these things, plus probably a whole lot more we don't understand. And even more important, what we don't understand is how they all interact exactly and perfectly together in an incredibly wonderful way that we don't completely understand. And we can't replicate in a baby formula. It's very frustrating to these big grant-writing PhD types at universities where they're trying to make a better baby formula and they can't because this is a living food, complete, made by 100,000 years or a million, pick your number, of the selective pressures of evolution versus a lab. So profoundly important what's going on. And you look over here, you see cow's milk matching up. Now, not the same antibodies, I agree. That comes from mom. And moms have to give those antibodies to the baby if they can for the first year or two of life. That's breastfeeding. Interesting to note that my daughter was breastfeeding our little grandson, Justin, and she was coming back to work and she was pumping and having a hard time getting enough milk. And she did some research, and she lives on a raw milk dairy. And she got so frustrated, she goes, I'm going to try raw milk in, raw milk out. She started guzzling raw milk. Her milk production went through the roof in 24 to 48 hours. In fact, she has a video at Farmers Over Pharmacies talking about her experience. It was very emotional about how she completely made all kinds of milk for her baby when she didn't have enough. My grandson. Pretty powerful stuff. Drinking lots of raw milk, it flowed out, but in human form out the other end. So pretty powerful here how this is really, really real. And, you know, if we'd known back 200 years and had that ancient wisdom coming through, our great-great-great-grandparents would probably tell us these things. We've lost that wisdom. So pretty powerful here. Here are some of the big studies that support the consumption of raw milk as a medical benefit. One of the things most all these studies say is raw milk has these profound benefits. There's one that's talking about asthma and allergies, a partial study, the first one done back in 2006, studying 23,000 children in Europe. The Gabriella study, which talked about asthma and allergies again. Asthma allergies, an Amish study. The pregnancy benefits found in mothers that drink raw milk during pregnancy have a different kind of antibody found in their cord blood at delivery. However, doctors won't ever say drink raw milk during pregnancy because of concerns of listeria. But if you look at the CDC data, does it show listeria in raw milk? It shows listeria in post-pasteurization contamination. So it's very interesting to look deeper. If I had a recall and I was a big processing plant with pasteurized milk, I'd want to blame it on raw milk. It has a dirty history going back to the 1800s. But it's my problem because it's the pasteurized problem and the fact that you denuded it and allowed competitive bacteria like listeria that likes food, no competition, and cold environments. And that's why you see all these people dying from listeria. It's post-pasteurization contamination, not raw milk consumption. So that was an interesting thing, that there's a tremendous benefit to mothers who are drinking clean, raw milk during pregnancy because it builds the immune system for the baby and themselves and gives them nourishment for life. Very, very profound there. Although it conflicts completely with doctors' recommendations that don't care about or don't know about this. 30% reduction of colds. The Ludwig Maximilian study done by Erica von Muschus, showed that children that were drinking raw milk had a dramatic decrease in ear infections and allergies and colds. 30%. It's like a major thing. And that was a powerful thing. All these things, by the way, are PubMed reviewed, except for this Michigan. This is all PubMed except for the Michigan cow share study. The French paradox, we've already talked about that, and a major decrease in lactose intolerance in those that were specifically lactose intolerant. Very few actually were, and if given an opportunity to consume kefir, raw milk kefir, for a little while. They didn't have lactose intolerance either. By getting their biome to adjust and adapt, they were okay as well. So pretty powerful. The last study that came out was a very interesting one done by researchers in Dr. Joan Whitehead in British Columbia. And she studied the CDC data and the registration of raw milk dairies across the United States and found that there's been a 350% increase in raw dairy permits in the last 5 years or so, 7 years. Very popular emerging market with a 74% decrease in illness. Shouldn't they go together if raw milk's dangerous? They should. 50%, you see big, no. There's been some very interesting things that have happened in raw milk safety as we've emerged into this market or re-emerged in the market after literally 100 years or 80 years of missing raw milk because pasteurization has kind of dominated the scene. So that's kind of the peer-reviewed science. It's all there. It comes out of Europe or Canada. It does not come from the United States. Why? Grants fund investigations. There's no grant funding from the NIH because the FDA has made raw milk illegal across state lines. And the big processors hate raw milk because it's milk that goes around them from farm to consumer. And so there's no money at the research end of the stick at the universities to actually support investigations from non-biased third parties. So they don't want to hear about raw milk, nothing. They want to hear about how dangerous it is because they don't want anybody competing with their falling market right now in the dairy industry. So very profound here how this research came to be. It's PubMed, which is the gold standard for science reference. If it's PubMed, a doctor can review it, and they're supposed to get good information. One very unique thing to think about on PubMed-reviewed publications, in almost every PubMed raw milk publication, at the very end, they say, but we can't recommend the consumption of raw milk because it may be dangerous. And the reason that's there is because the peer review won't allow it to be published without that statement. It's almost the same statement on every one of them. So all this great stuff, but you can't do it. So in California, you got raw milk all over the place with 5 certified raw milk dairies to produce raw milk, 1 organic and the rest conventional. But nonetheless, they're all producing it and serving our customers. In Pennsylvania, there's 80 dairies that are certified to produce raw milk and serving their customers. Washington State, Arizona, they're state by state, but we have raw milk access in the United States pretty much universally except for 7 states. So pretty powerful here to see the science behind raw milk. Here's a slide that I robbed out of a presentation that I saw down in Sydney, Australia, almost by Aaron's place down there in New Zealand. And they said, please don't show this to the world. And I'm showing it to everybody I possibly can. And I took a snapshot. And the researchers were showing raw milk down here. Breast milk and raw milk are very non-allergenic on the lower, very, very low end of the spectrum. But that's at body temperature. When you start pasteurizing, there's this non-Goldilocks zone, I'll say, where it becomes very allergenic. But then not allergenic again once it's completely cooked. I'm talking boiled and made into some kind of a pudding or something. So this is one of the reasons why pasteurization has a real conflict because it's so allergenic, triggers all kinds of mast cell destruction and histamines to go crazy. And that's why you see fewer and fewer people consuming pasteurized milk if they've got a choice. They go to nut milk or they go to raw milk in America. So this is kind of an interesting area here. It's not so good for life on Earth, and that's why it's having a problem. So I thought I'd share that little piece of high-tech, behind-the-scenes information that nobody wants anybody to see. I want you to all see it. Very, very profound. Here's raw milk under the microscope. This is magnified 4,200 times. This is magnified 175 times. You can see how it looks just like blood here. That's actually butterfat cells, but nonetheless, after homogenization and pasteurization, it certainly doesn't look the same. It kind of looks like sandpaper. Over here, this is ultra-high temperature pasteurized and magnified 175 times. This looks like a coral reef, very organized, kind of Mother Nature's design of something. And over here, it looks like very, very fine sandpaper. This is the hard-to-digest stuff and the very allergenic stuff. This is the easy-to-digest and non-allergenic stuff. So physically, it takes on a different look as well. Here is the new face of gut biome recovery. This is a patient of an NTA. This is, or NTP, I guess, depending on how you look at it. Tara. Tara Rosas, she recovered from, here she is, I'll go back a second. One more time, go back. Here she is in an ICU with Remicade and 6-MP and antibiotics and corticosteroids and everything else, having Crohn's in a bad shape in her early 20s. And here she is literally a couple years later, completely fine without having a colostomy and on no drugs. And the doctors are telling her, there is no difference in what you eat. We don't know what causes it, and food doesn't matter. That was the recommendations from physicians. I got nauseated when I heard that, okay? But this is what she's told by doctors. But yet, here is her face in terms of total recovery using bone broths, the GAPS diet, and raw milk kefir. Remember raw milk kefir? Fermented form of the first form of life. This is what restores the gut, completely changed her gut from being on fire 3 or 4 weeks from having a colostomy to being totally fine. So, don't believe a word you're hearing over there. We always tell people, go to the doctor today to make yourself feel better and take care of the acute problem you've got today. Come to the farmer tomorrow. Come to the NTPs tomorrow. We'll take care of the long-term problem. I was a paramedic for 17 years. Trust me, if you got a gunshot wound in you, you need to see a doctor and surgery now. But when it comes to chronic disease, you may need to see them today because you're scared. But I tell you what, when things calm down, go see the naturopaths, go see the DOs, go see the farmer, go see the farmer's market, go see the food, go see the nutrition, the West Day Price. Go see those places that actually encourage the restoration of the gut biome. That's what's really critical here. And she's not alone. If you want to see a really kind of cool website, Farmers Over Pharmacies, it just began a few months ago. It shows the stories of some of these people, and it's expanding literally every few weeks we add another story. The stories are profound. Here's Doug Labasso, an MMA fighter, a stud, really cool guy, right? Macho man, go fight him up. He hit somebody in the mouth in a bar fight one day because they offended his girlfriend. It was all sad. But he got a cut in his hand. Because remember, what's the most filthy place on your body? Your mouth. So he popped somebody in the face, got a cut in his hand, and it got really, really, really sick because he's got to cut his hand off. It was like totally infected hand. And they put him on antibiotics. They actually put him on a strong chemotherapy drug because it became such antibiotic resistant. The infection was horrible. He's going to lose his hand. He lost weight. He was sick. He was in bad shape. What did he do? He consulted with Tara, who'd recovered from gut problems. He actually got a hell of a case of Crohn's disease as a result of his therapies. And so using the GAPS diet, bone broths, and raw milk kefir, a lot of it over a period of time, completely recovered his gut, brought his weight back, and continued to fight, but fought a little more ethically and didn't do it in bars. But the bottom line was, heck of a story here with Doug back east in New York, who actually fully recovered. Paxton's parents, 7-year-old child, severe food allergies, including nut allergies, asthma, EpiPen in every room, was chronically blue around the lips. Another nutritional counseling done by Annie Drew in San Diego. Completely recovered within 3 months. Running track within 6 months without food allergy. Leaky gut syndrome completely fixed. Deep nutrition and looking at these biome foods. Full story there. I'm not telling anybody anything. I'm just interviewing these parents about what happened to their child. Jordan Rubin, Maker's Diet, went from Crohn's to completely fine using fermented goat milk kefir in San Diego in the 1990s. Tara's story, Kicker Johnson has a different kind of story, but how he went through chemotherapy and thrived by using gut biome supporting foods, including a lot of raw milk kefir, by the way, to assure that his gut was well as chemo did its job on the cancer. I'm not suggesting chemo is the best way forward, but I'm saying it's the only way forward we know now, and what we have to do is kind of work with it because it works, and the fact that we have to support the body as we go about the nasty work of getting rid of cancer in people's bodies. That's a fantastic marriage at this point. I think that we'll get better in the future, but at this point, phenomenal story of his complete recovery without getting sick. Doctors said expect to be hospitalized several times this year because the immune suppression is going to be so severe. He never went to hospital. He was never sick. When he was in the waiting room, he was playing, he was happy, he was fine. The other kids looked like they were ready to go. So, pretty profound story there. Kameli, a Maasai warrior from Kenya, grew up suckling raw milk literally directly from the teat of a cow because he was an orphan child and would have died if he hadn't had that. Kameli came to America, an interesting story how he came to America. If you want to look up his story, it's pretty profound. It had to do with 9/11, it had to do with some interesting things. He ended up going to Stanford University and getting his master's degree. And during that process, he got a heck of a case of Crohn's disease because the highly processed milk in America made him so sick. He was drinking a lot of soy milk because he couldn't drink the pasteurized stuff, even though he grew up on raw. And we hear a lot of people saying, oh, if you are from Africa or if you're from Asia, you got lactose intolerance. No. He shows this to be true. He drank and thrived on raw milk. After literally a few months of consumption of raw milk, his digestive tract was back to normal, and he thrives on raw milk. But yet, on pasteurized or soy or these other things, fell apart. So it's very interesting to see the truth coming through in terms of the fact that it's the pasteurized problem, not the people problem. Very, very profound, and these stories are there at Farmers Over Pharmacies. His story will be up here in the next month or two. It's a brave approach when you think about bone broth versus raw milk kefir versus pain, colostomies, and Remicade. When people get that extreme, it's pretty easy from a nutritional counseling standpoint to say, what would you prefer, a surgery to poop in a plastic bag for the rest of your life, or would you try this really delicious food? Not a hard sell, but a scary sell. Because when they go to the doctor and the doctor says, this is the only pathway forward, ignore everybody else, they're crazy, they're faced with a really, really tough place. Scared with somebody who's not a doctor or with a doctor. And it's not an easy place to be. But it's where we are today in America. It's really very, very profound. And here's a little kicker over there consuming some raw kefir. The history of raw milk in humans, 10,000 years, we actually have evidence going back to 15,000 years. It kept us from starving. If you think about it, here you are. You weren't very successful fishing today, and you weren't very successful hunting today. And some of the things you were hunting would eat you sometimes, so you were careful about hunting. And farming, you know what? We had a famine, and we lost all the stuff we planted, and the deer ate it. We're starving. The kids are crying. Everybody's getting skinny, sick. If you had a cow, a horse, a sheep, a camel, and you had grass or could move to a place that did have grass, you ate today. And that food was portable. And when you milked that cow or that goat or that sheep and you put it into a vase or a gourd, it wasn't clean. It was from 2 weeks ago and it still had a little residual from the last time you did it. And that was the culture from the previous milking that inoculated it. So you had fresh milk today, but literally hours later or days later, you had kefir. And that kefir would last for months. And when it got really old and stinky, you put it through a cloth and you'd take that whey and you'd preserve vegetables with it, lactofermentation, and you'd make kefir cheese that would last for years. So this mammal part of our life is something we've forgotten about because when you go to the local store, you've got all the choices you ever think. It's all cool. But the bottom line is you take all that away and you go naked and afraid, you beg for a mammal to be there with you so they can consume something to convert things you can't eat, like grass, because they've got 4 stomachs and we don't, the ruminants. And we can eat today, and eat well today, and with a complete food. So very profound in terms of the history. And we had camels, goats, sheep, horses, all kinds of stuff. And it was food today. It was portable. If you had grass, rain, sunshine, you had a whole food. It contained the biodiversity, which is critical for the immune system to work. And it had fermented forms with huge amounts of bacteria. And it had the food to feed them. It was a complete solution. So pretty powerful here. Here's Messiah again. And here's the milk maidens. Interesting immunological history of the milk maidens and smallpox versus cowpox. The milk maidens didn't get smallpox because they were exposed to the cowpox with the cow and their intimate connection with the cows. Which smallpox killed a lot of people, and it was the milk maidens that didn't. So interesting how we have combined genomically our history with domesticated animals and shared a lot of the genomics together. Here's a very interesting few words about raw milk safety. I was a founder of the Raw Milk Institute about coming up on almost 9 years ago now. And I became very frustrated by, in the 2009 period, there was a bunch of kids that really got sick from raw milk consumption in Oregon. And it was a sentinel event where, the farmer's kid even got sick. And it was really, really sad. Nobody died, but there was some kidney transplants. It's almost emotional when people talk about this because it just disturbs me so much. So we created the Raw Milk Institute, which actually created standards that did not exist before. And we knew that when people pulled up the farms to say, I want your raw milk, they saw white picket fences and beautiful roses and a wonderful farmer, but they had no idea what was going on inside the cow or inside the milk lines or what was going on in terms of production practices. So we got some experts from around the world, PhDs, veterinarians, epidemiologists to sit on a board together. We made peace. We said, we're going to do this. We created the Raw Milk Institute. Now we have 17 dairies in North America, between 5 in Canada and the rest of the United States, several in California, Pennsylvania. And we're actually starting to do a lot of work in the UK with Great Britain to establish these standards and allow farmers to understand how to make their milk sanitary and fully differentiate the difference between raw milk that goes off to be pasteurized and raw milk goes off to be consumed raw for human consumption. And let there never be a commingling of those together. They are separate, completely different products, different practices, different conditions, different testing, different expectations, different consumers. So this is what happened, and I'm so proud that, in fact, One of the charts found on that study done by the British Columbia researcher, Dr. Joan Whitehead, was the fact that when training was provided, there was a cliff of safety change. It went from rumbling along with illnesses to literally almost none. And the farmers over here did not attend the food safety training that was actually provided at Penn State University in British Columbia. So we know that it's not rocket science. An 8-hour training day and setting a standard, the expectations were there. And most farmers have a really good heart and want to do well for their consumers and customers. They will do what they've got to do to make it right. And that's what we saw here, was this phenomenon we call the Rami effect. And I'm very proud of the fact that we've seen virtually almost none as far as illness is concerned after we see training was provided to farmers. So pretty profound there. And there's a website, the Raw Milk Institute, which actually shares this information in more detail. Okay, here's raw milk for people. Here's raw milk for pasteurization. These are milk filters that are put in line between the cow and the milk tank on dairies. And this is a dairy milk tank filter showing literally filth. A lot of manure. Why? Well, some dairies may be like that, some dairies may be like that, but guess what? All that milk that goes out to be pasteurized gets combined together. It's put into one big common milk tank. So even if that dairyman was doing a fantastic job, and sometimes they do, it gets combined with somebody who's doing that. And so I've been criticized by showing this slide because the dairymen say, that shows filthy milk. I said, it may not be yours, but it's your neighbor. And you're not being paid any different for the two. And so they have to kind of be quiet at that point because it's true. It's the lowest common denominator that actually runs the standard. It's what's contaminating the milk that makes the standard. If you did a great job, rock on, that's fantastic. But it didn't matter because it's all combined together. Raw milk for human consumption should always come from one source, and that farmer should take it really seriously and transparently, and you should know what's going on, and he should know what's going on. And that's what you see, the cleanliness is so important. Because genomically, raw milk already has a wonderful diversity in it. You don't need to have contamination from everything in the world in there on top of it, because you can't pasteurize to get it out. And with our immune systems being depressed, that bad bug come through, especially with using antibiotics and Roundup and stuff. We've got resistant bacteria that ending up in milk too. You got to be careful because our immune system is depressed, superbug coming, you got illness. So we got to be really game on here to do raw milk well. So there are different standards for different customers. One's for the broker, one's for people. This is that?
How does the manure get in there? Is the manure on the cow?
Cows poop, yeah, absolutely. But it's not just manure. It's the health of what's inside the udder as well. You can have mastitis, which can actually produce a pathogen as well.
And I can expect you said that was actual manure.
Yeah.
But it's like if the manure's on the ground, I mean, I
Sure.
get it, it's giving us, but like how does the manure get from the ground?
It doesn't come to the ground. Cows lay down. They lay down all over the place. They lay down in pastures. They get manure on their udders.
Okay.
That's all fine and dandy. But when you go to milk the cow, you need to clean the udder off. So the machine goes on. You're sucking milk directly from the cow, and it's not contaminated with environmental contaminations. Okay, this is the kind of conditions that you want to have mostly around your cows, to actually have sunlight and grass and the right kind of bacteria. This is a wonderful biome for production of milk. This is the kind of biome you see in some, not all, I'm not going to blame everybody, some big dairies that are just huge and being paid so poorly right now, and they're suffering so greatly because they're getting $13 to $14 a hundredweight for the milk, and they need 17 to 18 to break even. So why would you invest anything other than speed and efficiency and keeping the cost as low as possible? And that's why it just doesn't matter, and they don't want you to come look at it because it ain't pretty. So I don't blame these guys. They're in economic turmoil right now. We're losing a dairy a week in California. We're losing 2 dairies a day in Wisconsin. The economics are not there. I blame pasteurization. I blame the lack of consumer-to-farmer connection, and the farmers don't know what consumers need and want. And I blame the scientists for not being honest with people about what the hell's going on. It's really quite tragic. And it's costing families, farms, left and right all over the place. I'm so glad that I'm associated with a dairy that does this completely connected to consumers. So anyway, this is the kind of conditions which actually predispose the different kinds of milk. The history, the dark history of raw milk. It's true, absolutely true. It happened all over the world. As people moved out of the country into cities, they brought their cows with them. They were essential to their life. But when they brought the cows to downtown Boston, it doesn't take too many cows in Boston Commons to make it a muddy mess. And then they didn't have any food to feed them. So what did they feed them? Distillers' grains. Distiller grains are horrible for the gut of the cow. And the milk they produced was gray and lightly blue in color, not rich in fats from sunshine and grass. So we created a kind of a hellhole. Literally, it was killing 50% of people who consumed that milk in the late 1800s, 1850 to 1890. So we have a very interesting story here where instead of cleaning up the milk, we killed it. And that's what happened with the advent of the standards of mentoring that occurred with Dr. Coit with the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions, which physician-supervised milk, which was expensive, started in 1893 and went through all the way through 1999, with Altadena being the last certified raw milk producer in Los Angeles. So very interesting course of about 100 years of history, but in 1945 or so, we were just coming out of World War II, we didn't have any money, we were kind of bankrupt, we were cheap food, we were fixing social problems with nuclear bombs and spraying DDT and all those terrible things, and smoking was good for your lungs. That's 1945. Well, we thought, let's just dominate by cooking everything and extending shelf life, you don't have to worry because it's super cheap. From that point, we saw kind of a loss of the raw milk dairies, and we saw an increase of pasteurization, and we went from 30 and 50 cow dairies to 500 to 5,000 to 15,000 cow dairies. So that was kind of the transition, but yes, there was a dark period there, and the other side, tries to tell us all the time, raw milk's horrible. I say, absolutely, in these conditions at that time period. But we recognize the conditions, and we can do testing and have good standards, entirely different reality in terms of where we're going. And because we're pioneering, nobody's there to help us. We're out by ourselves in front with consumers that want us. So we have to be thinking independently and working hard to bring everything together to make it all work. So, evidence going back, these Croatian pots here, I thought this was a beautiful picture, but these are Croatian milk pots that show collection of milk from literally 7,000 to 8,000 years ago that have butterfat and sugars and everything that the scientists have actually been able to see that this is where the history of raw milk began and fermentation of raw milk began. Pretty profound. So we must reorient ourselves and rediscover what we are and how we came to be what we are today if we intend to survive and thrive beyond today. And it is literally, how do we feed our inner bacteria sapien? And it's with whole food. Now, I'm not talking about the whole food store. That's a great name for a store, by the way. But the bottom line is we're talking about whole food. And that means unprocessed. Just give me the soil from the farmer, thank you. Don't mess with it. Don't spray it. Don't put stickers on it. Don't wax it. Just pull it out of the ground and give it to me, and I'll take care of it. That's whole food. Whole food is raw. Whole food comes from the sea. Whole food's 100% whole wheat. It's dairy products in raw form. It's eggs. It's yogurt. It's fruits and vegetables. It's snacks with dried fruit. It's beverages like water and kombucha. These are whole foods that are nutrient dense for our gut biome that thrive so well. So pretty important here that it's whole food that our gut biome needs. Not partial foods, not preserved foods, not radiated foods, not funky foods, not engineered stuff, no GMOs. We're talking about whole foods here. We hear a lot about taking a pill, a probiotic pill. And I'm not anti-probiotic pill at all. But I will say this. We know from science that a probiotic pill is kind of like an alligator. If you want a swamp and alligators to thrive in it, like we've got here on the right side, a swampy, biodiverse alligators, you kind of treat these like the villi in your gut. You need to have the swamp first before the alligator will ever thrive. That is our gut when it's barren. We must create a swamp first. How do you do that? Through food. Create the environment in which food is the cradle of life. And then you put your alligators in it. And then the probiotic pills may work a little bit. The cool thing about whole food and raw milk kefir is that it's got the alligators and the food to feed the alligators all together in one. It's the whole food nutrition of life. So this is kind of the interesting thing where we've got Dr. Bruce German, who is a former PhD who studies breast milk at UC Davis, the International Milk Genomics Consortium, saying, we must rewild our gut. Well, this is wild, and this is moonscape. So to get back to this area where our gut is working properly, we need to literally lay down the cradle of life with food, whole food nutrition, and then add the bacteria into it, or do them simultaneously through these completely comprehensive foods. So pretty powerful to see that most leading scientists in the world are saying these kinds of things. We see Dr. Jewett in UCLA saying it. We see Dr. Bruce German saying this at UC Davis, and they're saying the same kinds of things. If we look at, this is really, really cool too. You look at the biome of Earth, and it's got these heat bands. You'll notice there's blue zones. Anybody ever heard of blue zones? Pretty cool stuff. It's where people live really long lives, longer than the surrounding area's expectancy of life. And they have different conditions, internally and externally, stresses, philosophies, nutrition. And there's one in Loma Linda, California, of all places, which is kind of interesting. There's 9,000 Seventh-day Adventists that live down there, and they don't smoke, they don't drink, they eat lots of good food, and they have a wonderful community. Interesting that they live about 10 to 12 years longer than the rest of the surrounding community, on average. And we've got some in Sardinia, Italy, we've got Ikaria, Greece, we've got Okinawa, we've got Costa Rica. It's interesting that you see things like raw milk cheeses and milking the goat and eating from the forest and all these kinds of things in a wonderful biome of life, which somehow gives them a long life expectancy. So we really can learn a lot from these areas around the world that actually encourage, through the biome and through the gut, how to eat. And one of them's right here in the United States. Pretty cool. It's not like you have to move to Costa Rica to do this. You can actually do it here. Okay. So the generation by generation selective pressures of evolution are really an important idea to conceive of, because Mother Nature doesn't have a lot of vacuum, and she doesn't have a lot of space for errors. Errors means you die and it doesn't continue. Raw milk is one of those wonderful foods, the only food to ever have endured that generation by generation, intended for human consumption, first food of life beginning. And so we can learn a lot with that. And if we start thinking about that, if we start messing with bacteria, we start messing with the life forces on Earth, and you're going to start having resistance, you're going to have major problems. We talk a lot about the external biome and global warming. We need to actually start medically now talking about the internal biome and our global heating as well, to match them up, because we're all in the same boat together. So the lunar module, life raft, we don't have one. We are on the Mother Earth. We are on Mothership. And so we can't call Houston, guys. We got to call a farmer. That's my takeaway today, is that Houston ain't going to help us. We got to call a farmer. This is where we must reconnect to in terms of the food, organic food, not GMO, but organic food, coming from the soil, trust them, understand them, and that is truly the sustainable way forward in medicine. In 1961, we were spending about 6% of our GNP on medical care. Now we're in excess of 20%, some say 23%, in terms of medical care in America. That's insane. You cannot go forward in medicine that way. There won't be enough young people to take care of old people. There won't be enough money for anybody. We're running out of antibiotics. It's not sustainable. We need our nutritional people helping us. We need farmers helping us. And yes, there's a place in the toolbox for modern medicine, absolutely. But it's part of the solution. We need to retrain our doctors so they have a whole lot more training and education in terms of the gut biome and nutrition, and have part of the toolbox the acute intervention part, but then the subsequent intervention is nutrition, so you don't have to go back to that expensive part, which doesn't work anyway. It's a masker of the signs and symptoms as everything blows up. It makes you feel better as you're going down the hole. It doesn't work. So powerful here in terms of these wonderful cows in the Swiss Alps here, and the milk they produce literally go back a long time in terms of our history with them. So the true brilliance in science is recognition of the obvious. It really, really is. It's recognition of the obvious. The true science is, the brilliance there is, it's clearly obvious, but nobody wants to look at it because it's inconvenient. It doesn't fit in our paradigm. So we have to be conscious to live aware. We really, really do. And we have to have enough guts and bravery to do something about it. And anybody heard of the story of the emperor has no clothes? It's such an incredible paradigm concept. Well, here's a naked emperor right there, and everybody's just celebrating with him, like, you look so beautiful with your great silken gown, when in fact he's ugly, fat, and naked. And the bottom line is, we have to change our paradigm and be conscious about the fact that I'm going to take personal responsibility and go this way. And when you look good, and you're healthy, and you got healthy kids, and they're thriving, and they're doing this, and they're doing that, the rest of everybody else eventually, pretty soon, will say, whoa, I'm going with this crowd, not this crowd. Colostomies versus raw milk, kefir, and bone broth. So powerful paradigm shift here. So failure is not an option. That was another interesting quote coming from Apollo 13, from the heart. It's not an option if we want to survive on Earth. These are decisions made for our children. So we are literally living on this planet by the miracle of something. I don't know how it happened. The sun warms us. We live here together, and it's up to us to make a change. Thank you so much. A little bit of passion, a little bit of emotion, but I think that's where it's at. Any questions? Yes, sir, ma'am. Sorry. The lights are so bright. It's the sun. Yes, absolutely. There's great science, by the way. Dr. Ton Bars did this research a few years ago, and there's other scientists who actually collaborated with him. The mast cells in your connective tissue actually release histamines when they're stimulated. They're part of the allergic response. And raw milk, the raw whey protein, has been discovered to be stabilizing of mast cells. And that's just one of the anti-inflammatory pathways. There's the alkaline phosphatase, and there's some other things working as well. But the bottom line is, a lot of the things that Erin was talking about in her presentation earlier talks about all these wonderful immunological issues we're trying to learn, how raw milk interplays, and other food as well. Because we don't just all drink raw milk, we eat other foods. But when you think about a super allergenic food, what happens in pasteurization and homogenization? Pasteurization kills bacteria. It inactivates enzymes. It heats all these very fragile proteins and denatures literally 2,500 different proteins with high heat, especially ultra-high temperature pasteurized heat of 280 degrees, which is higher than boiling. So you have a denaturing of a product which is, think about it this way. Would you ever allow a doctor to infuse you with pasteurized blood if you needed it? Absolutely not. How about homogenized pasteurized blood? Absolutely not. It would kill you. Okay? So the bottom line is, think of raw milk more like blood than a fluid you lubricate your cereal with, right? That's what's triggering these immunological triggers in different pathways. But I do know that mast cells degrade, histamines are released, and the histamines trigger all kinds of inflammation in your body, and that's on purpose. You got dead parts of things in your body that don't belong there. Get it out of here. Create mucus to surround it up and cough it out and get it out of here any way you can. So your body reacts to it. That's why it's listed as the #1 most allergenic food in America. And the pathways, I know one pathway is the raw whey protein stabilizing mast cells, but there's other anti-inflammatory pathways like alkaline phosphatase, and I'm sure there's many, many, many more. I'm not a scientist, but I study this stuff. So yes, you still may even have some people saying, I get a little phlegm or whatever. Your biome does not switch like this. It switches over time. It evolves with the influences on it. It evolves with the food given it, the environment it's given, stresses, hormones, all those things. So what we have to do is seek out a blue zone that we can live within that allows us to live aware, right? And allows us to be healthy and have healthy children. It's a very large subject that we don't understand very well, but we're beginning to get a really good picture of it, and doctors don't know anything about it. So it's up to people like Weston A. Price and nutritional counselors to actually help us understand so we can be healthier people in all these ways, and perhaps have better, more available raw milk that's safe and clean that we can all consume to help us in that perspective, but then also access to other whole foods as well. Because so many of our other foods that we think are whole are not. If you've seen that Jeffrey Smith movie, you've got to see it about the role of GMO and the fact that it's not just the GMO, but it's the fact that the GMO crops are saturated with Roundup, which is a heavy antibiotic, which is literally killing us. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
The first one is, raw butter is difficult to find. Why is that, and how can I find it without making it myself?
Quick question. How many gallons of raw milk does it take to make 1 pound of raw butter? 3 gallons. My gosh, that creates a lot of skim milk nobody wants.
But you can find, I can find I can find butter, made by a local dairy in my town, but it's not raw.
Correct.
Why can't I get raw? Why can they make, I mean, if it takes 3 pounds, why?
3 gallons.
Sorry, 3 gallons.
Yeah.
Why do they make pasteurized butter and not raw butter? It's the same.
It's a great question. It's a great question. I know that there's only one organic raw butter that's retail approved in the United States. Here in California, it's $15, $16, $17 a pound, because the underlying value of the milk to make that butter was worth $50. So it's sold at a loss because nobody wants the skim. The whole food revolution is a whole food. They don't want skim. They want whole. They want the fat. The fat's where it's at. So raw butter is a real privilege. And even in pasteurized form and organic, that's okay too, because heat doesn't affect fats as much as it does as proteins and other. There's not a lot of protein in raw butter. It's mostly fat. It's like 86% fat. So the fats are not as heat sensitive. And so low temperature pasteurization, not homogenization of an organic sourced butter is probably pretty darn good. but realize when you cook with it, you lose the value. So if you're wanting to eat raw butter, for instance, you have a child who has autism, you really want to get the butter fats going on and not be changed in any way with the enzymes like lipase, then you would go with the raw butter. But the bottom line is, butter has the least sensitive effects to heat as long as the heats are kept low. Because it's fat. It doesn't have protein, doesn't have sugars, doesn't have much. It has a little, just trace amounts, but mostly fat. But it's very, very expensive. And you have to have a butter churn. You have to have it approved. You have to be inspected. You have to have insurance. I mean, my God, it's all these things that farmers just don't want to do, and it's so expensive to do. So it's a tough one. Raw butter is a privilege. Trust me. It's the gold. It's like, give me the raw butter. I don't want that gold over here. I want the raw butter gold. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. We do.
So, what do you do with your skim?
We sell it off to be pasteurized with organic market. We get rid of it. Our market doesn't want it. And you know what we could do? We could feed pigs. And that may be something that happens, because I tell you what, butter and bacon, what a combination. Butter and bacon. So the butter and then the skim milk left over may end up being fed to hogs because they love to get fat on raw milk, skim milk, and without fat on it. So I don't have the answer to that, but I tell you what, it is a challenge. And it's one of those things where we have a low-fat deal going on in America in terms of people embracing low-fat. It's changing now where you go back to good fats. But for the time being, we actually sell it.
So when we buy raw butter, we're supporting selling skim milk to be homogenized.
Not on my brand. Somebody else's. And when they say no, we're going to feed pigs. Any other thoughts? Yes? I do. It's got 2 armed guards upstairs in there. You know what? I didn't bring a whole bunch for people to drink today. It is available with 500 stores, and there's 4 different producers of raw milk in California. We're the only certified organic. The rest of them do a great job and do an all-natural job. But we support all producers of raw milk as best we can. Any other thoughts, concerns? Yes, ma'am.
Just one quick question. You mentioned, so for the people that are lactose intolerant, just don't do well with milk, and we don't really know why. Do you, if you're going to give them raw milk, do you have to gradually bring it in? Would that be less than you do, or how do you switch?
We have seen severely lactose intolerant people do quite well with a glass of raw milk straight off the get-go. However, in abundance of caution, I would say a Dixie cup and see how it feels. And then 2 Dixie cups 4 or 5 hours later, see how it feels. And then the other most cautious way to do would be a Dixie cup of kefir, which is already digested and has a reduced amount of lactose in it, sugar in it, and has all kinds of enzymes and all kinds of things that your gut is yearning for that will probably be more easily accepted. So it's an experiment to see how it goes. That's what it is. And remember, you're bringing a new sheriff to town. Be cautious how you introduce the new force because it is life force. It's powerful food. And so give your body a chance to evolve slowly. You don't have to do everything in one day. Okay, any other thoughts? I think that's it. Thank you so much. LiveAware. Thank you, everyone.